that make all of this possible. So thank you all, taxpayers. That's really wonderful. Any other housekeeping things? I don't think so. I think we're okay. So, by the way, as it says here, it is All Space Considered on the first Friday. And it is February 1st. Happy February.
Are you going to do songs and swag?
Oh, I guess we should. Bill.
Hi.
I always forget about songs and swag. I know. I don't know where it is.
Yes. I'm sorry, what? Okay. Don't worry about it. I'll get it later. Gotta keep the show moving. Gotta get my mute off. Okay. Hi, everybody. I appreciate it. I heard you clapping. I've got a little fan base somewhere right in here. So I'm here to explain that we make science even more fun in the show by playing a game during the course of the evening. If you're brand new, I think there are about 4 of you up there that are brand new, you heard music on your way in. If you can remember what those pieces of music were, whether they're rock songs or blues or classical or whatever, each one of them has a thematic connection to one of the stories that we're going to do tonight. Or it could be just a word title, connection, something like that. If you can think of that when the story comes up and you're the first to shout out, I want to hold your hand, or whatever it is, or that Beatles song, or whatever, however you identify it, then you get a prize. You get to win a prize. And so if it happens in the first half of the show, you come down at intermission, and I'll hook you up here. And if it happens in the second half, then at the end of the show. I must tell you, we have all kinds of cool stuff. This is my favorite new thing. This just looks like a little piece of paper. It's not. You open it up and punch out all the little pieces, and you can make your own paper model of the new Horizons spacecraft. Is that awesome, or what? We also have, I don't have them here, but we have some James Webb, they're underneath here. James Webb Space Telescope posters. Some of you have already won some of those. I figure if we all get one and we put them up and we really, really believe that we'll launch that telescope into space someday. And finally, of course, and we got all kinds of mission stickers and things. So Dr. Reitzel provided this. It's actually a kind of a all-year calendar thing. You turn dials on it and it tells you what the day is. But we have actual calendars, too. We have calendars from the Observatory. This is a beautiful calendar from Friends of the Observatory. It is expired. Most of our calendars are expired. But reduce, reuse, and recycle. You can use calendars again in later years. This is a 2018 calendar. It will be perfectly good in 2029. This is a 2019 calendar. I don't know why you'd want that now, because you want to wait till 2030 to use this one, or you could use it now. I'm going to wrap this up because I know we need to keep moving. But there's some Mars rover calendars, all kinds of fun stuff. And I still have some Cassini pins that are just beautiful. So think about the songs you heard, shout them out at the appropriate time, come win a prize. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Yeah. We will add that none of the songs belong in either of our guest speakers. So you don't need to shout out during their guest speaker segments. So tonight we have a segment about observing at Keck. Stop calling it a blood moon. Went to the moon and brought Earth home. Orbital bombardment. A tale of 2 asteroids. An update from 4,129,096,958 miles away, exactly. And our special guests, Dr. Sharmila Bhattacharya and Professor Raja GuhaThakurta. Raja is actually my PhD thesis advisor, so we're very happy to have you here tonight. And then we'll have a little bit of talk about some seismic tests that we're going to do in this building while you're here. No, I'm kidding, but you'll find out what that's about. Pretty pictures, and then we do take a break. So the break's a great time to stretch your legs. It'll only be about 8 minutes long this time, so you'll want to make sure you come back. And then second half, we'll talk about Gaia diamonds. Oh, the weather outside was frostbiteful. Warming, melting, and puppies and stairs. Saturn's rotation rate. You might think we knew about that, but maybe not so much. When Starhopper met ground, and Golden Griffith nominations. Now, how many were here last year at the Golden Griffiths we did? Anybody? Yeah, well, we're starting that all up again we hope for the better, because we sure had a lot of fun with it. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the U.S. minting an Apollo 11 50th anniversary coins, and then a little tribute to Apollo 11 that we'll show you a little trailer for that. So we have a great show in store from you, and we want to start it with a launch like we always do.
8. We should have ignition. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and Liftoff of the United Launch Alliance Delta IV Heavy rocket with NROL-71
It
from
made
the
it.
National Reconnaissance Office.
Yes, so the show's off to a launch. Now, that the big flames you saw at the start are actually normal. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Tonight we are streaming, by the way, so if you like anything you're seeing, you can go check it out again on our YouTube channel.
And hello, stream people.
Yeah, hi, Mom. So, but first off, you, Laura, you were just
Yeah.
off having some
So, yeah, often, in case you're wondering why I'm being so mute over here, I was actually gone for a good fraction of the month. And so I want to thank David for taking the lead and putting this show together, because I was off visiting this lovely building. And it doesn't look like much to visit, to go travel quite a distance. But what's important about that building is really what's above that building if you zoom in. And perhaps you can see at the top here a bunch of telescope domes. That's the big island of Hawaii, and that I was observing at the Keck telescope, courtesy a colleague and friend who put me on a proposal, and so we had just a really wonderful time. So I flew all the way to Hawaii to go to that building, and at first it seemed like it was going to be a great trip because it was a gorgeous sunset, we swam in the ocean, hey, this is kind of great being in Hawaii, but then from then on out, this is pretty much what it was. So that's the control room at Keck in Waimea. And there are colleagues with whom I did the proposal. And our plan, it really came from the fact that I was trying to get Nick Scoville, the principal investigator, to come give a talk here for how many years? So he put me on this proposal and said, well, give us something to talk about. So we actually made a little movie, and we're going to show you that when they come to visit, and we'll tell you all about the proposal. So this is a preview, but just to introduce you to the cast of characters.
I'm Nick Scoville. I'm a professor at Caltech.
So my name is Andreas Feist. I'm Swiss.
Hi, my name is Behnam Darwish. I'm Persian from Iran.
So those are the three astronomers with whom I did the observing. We had absolutely gorgeous conditions. This is just a picture. You can see Hawaii is right here in the middle of that. And we had record seeing. We had, for those who care, less than 0.4 arc seconds. Just, that's a really good number. And our worst seeing in 3 nights was 0.48, but we were at times lower than 0.8. The atmosphere was still transparent, gorgeous. They also, the Keck staff also told us we broke another record because we had the most treats. Any group who came, we were feeding, next door is Keck 2, and people were coming over from Keck 2 to get our treats as well. So the observing happens in Waimea. You don't observe from the mountaintop, but we did get to the mountaintop. That's Matthew Burlando, who's back in the booth back there with me, helping capture all the wonderful moments of this trip. And this little video taken with my cell phone, I am not moving. That's the telescope moving. It looks like I'm rising, but in fact, when the telescope, which is huge, is moving, we're going to have a little wave in there. There we go, we're waving. They actually brought the telescope down because they needed to do something to the secondary. So it's looking right at us, and there we are. Very exciting. We used an instrument called MOSFIRE, which is a multi-object spectrograph in the infrared. And so you might have seen these kinds of masks where you put it on an instrument and several different spectra are all taken at the same time. And in fact, I will just show you some example of some beautiful results.
This is hydrogen line. This is a nitrogen line. This galaxy. Okay, and this galaxy is located at redshift of 2.2. This is what we expected.
So you stay up all night, freeze your backside off, and that's what you get. And you're pretty darned excited about it. On the last day, second last day, we actually did get a chance to go look at the volcano that erupted last year. And there's still quite a lot of steam coming out. But anyway, it was truly a wonderful trip. And, oh, I'm sorry, David. I couldn't remember what that last movie was. So we will, that's a preview. We will be sharing with you more about that in a future show when we get Nick to come on over and be a guest.
Excellent. Looking forward to that. It'll be fun. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. He needs to come now.
Yeah.
So, of course, we had a big event with the moon, and we caught some video of it that you got a little preview of, and here it is. Okay. This is not This was just a giant inflatable moon that broke free in China at some point. I don't know when, but I had to show it. But the event you actually all heard about, of course, was the super blood wolf moon, or the wolf super blood wolf. I don't know. And all those terms. Actually, wolf moon comes from the Algonquins. I guess it was picked up by the Farmer's Almanac. It's just a nickname for the January moon. Blood moon is actually an eclipse. A supermoon is when the moon is nearest its closest point to the Earth. The orbit's a little bit elliptical. Sometimes a little further, sometimes a little closer. When it's closest, when it's full, they call it a supermoon. And this is a relatively new thing. In the past decade or so, it's popped up out of nowhere. So I say let's roll with it if people like it. Why not?
Although, do you want to say why stop calling it a blood moon?
Well, it's not really the color of blood. If it's going to be a blood moon, it should be blood red. It's more coppery. It can have turquoise colors to it. It should be the beautiful, colorful moon. I don't know.
And it
Why
also
not
came
butterfly
from
moon?
it came from a conspiracy idea that the 4 lunar eclipses that we had in what's called a tetrad a couple of years ago was going to be the end of the world. So it's another one of those end of the world conspiracy ideas, and that's where this term blood moon comes, and then it just took off in the media. So that's why I was like, no.
Yeah. No need to call it that.
You just call it an eclipse.
Yeah, and they're beautiful. In fact, we had an event here. Folks came on up for it. This was during the day. People were getting set up. Some folks decided to bring chairs and blankets and enjoy the eclipse. At night, by the time it was starting to get packed, you see the telescopes being set up there, people in line to buy a snack, things like that. I got to dress up in a wizard outfit and drive the dragon away. That's tradition here at Griffith Observatory to do that, so I played my role. Really what was going on, though, was we had an eclipse.
Yeah. So how many of you saw the eclipse? Yeah, it was really easy. You just go outside and look up. And for so many people, it was clouded out. But right here, it's like we had this little perfect window for the duration of the eclipse. It's kind of incredible.
Well, when you
we
have
were
a
so
wizard in
fortunate.
the house.
Yeah, that's true. The wizard made it possible. So we got this nice montage of images from David Pinsky, who is sitting right there, museum guide. And you can see the stars in the background. Sometimes people say, where are the stars? Well, there they are. You can see them. In the dark, when the exposure is faint, and the exposure is long to pick up faint moons, so you can see the stars. So just, beautiful images. For those of you who saw it, it was, had this wonderful sort of purple hue at the top. It was really a breathtaking thing. We also had a live stream, and usually NASA carries our live stream, but with the government shutdown, they were unable to. So if you look down at the numbers there, we had, 1 million people. All told, with all the different videos we put up, we've served over 1.5 million people. Again, made possible by Friends of the Observatory. See, you want to join Friends of the Observatory, yes.
Or just pay your taxes.
Yeah, well, no, but the streaming and the streaming equipment,
that's
all
true.
that is Friends of the Observatory.
That is true. We couldn't do it without them.
So one of the things that came out of the stream that people noticed immediately, it was in the comments, was this. Now watch very, very carefully. It goes very quickly. There. Thanks for the sound effect, Jeff. So here we did it half speed, hey, yeah. So just in case you still haven't seen it, it's down there in the corner, and now we're going to slow it down to 1/8 speed so you can really see it. So it was just in one frame. 1/30th of a second, so fast as the meteoroid that flies through space struck the surface of the moon, kicked up some regolith that was all just ignited and gave this very, very, very fast flash. This was picked up by the media all over the place. You can see the New York Times was there, and look at us, Griffith Observatory. So yay for that. So the moon is also in the news because.
That's right.
Yeah, Patrick.
Yeah, so here's a story that involves the Earth and the Moon, and actually, we can go to the next slide. This huge moon rock, which was collected by the Apollo 14 astronauts back in 1971, it's the largest piece they collected on the mission, and there's a banana to scale, just in case you want to know how big it is. It weighs nearly 20 pounds, and it has something special in it. We also have a fragment of it. Since then, that big rock has been separated into smaller fragments, and this is one that you can see here at Griffith Observatory. It's the same piece of rock. But
It's just outside the door out
yeah,
there, by the
check
way.
it out.
right by the moon globe.
Yeah.
But an analysis of this rock revealed something very interesting, particularly the minerals in this moon rock. They found something called feldsite, and feldsite is a kind of like a granite type of material, which is very uncommon on the moon. You wouldn't even find it on the moon, but it's very common here on Earth, and it would form in an environment where there's lots of oxygen and lots of water. This suggests that that this this particular mineral in this moon rock at some point came from Earth. It's a little piece of piece of Earth embedded in moon rock, and that's amazing. We can go to the next slide, and we see the various components of feldsite: quartz, feldspar, and zircon. They age determined zircon, which is on the right, and found it to be about 4 billion years old, which gives us an age for this particular sample of Earth rock that's embedded in that moon rock. And they believe that at some point in the Earth's distant past, right when an asteroid impacted Earth, blasted pieces of Earth rock, and the moon was a lot closer than during that time. And some of those fragments ended up on the moon and became embedded in the moon rock. And so, the irony is that it took us 4 billion years to bring back a piece of that moon rock that was blasted by an asteroid.
Yeah. Exactly. In fact, you see large craters on the moon here.
Pardon me. I want to cough away from the microphone. But
Exactly.
coughing on you, so I'm fine.
But as you can see here, the moon is covered with craters. There's large ones here with rays coming off them, smaller ones. They're all over the place. And you can measure the cratering rate on the moon by looking at the location. We know that the mare, the seas of the moon, they're not really seas, of course, but these were younger than the highlands, so they have fewer craters on them, so you can sort of look at the cratering rate and date them. Well, a group of researchers went in and dated craters that were larger than a kilometer to sort of get the idea of how fast the cratering rate was changing with time, and most people expected it to go down. Well, they learned that it actually jumped. It went up 2 to 3 times, so we're getting 2 to 3 times more impacts now than 3-4 billion years ago. Well, not 4 billion years ago, but 2-3 billion years ago. Heavy bombardment, there was a lot more. But after the heavy bombardment died down, we thought it would be a sort of slow decline as the stuff got used up and ran into planets, and there was less and less of it out there. Turns out, during the era of the dinosaurs, the rate seems to have increased.
And it looked just like
It looked
that.
exactly. This is extremely accurate. We strive for accuracy here at All Space Considered. These are the locations of some of the craters that they studied, and they made a little movie where they coded each impact by the tone, and also you can just hear them hitting as the time passes, and you can hear the rate increase. So we're going to watch this little video and see what happens. So not a whole lot going on. Still okay.
Sounds like Disney Hall.
Disney Hall. And now, all of a sudden, things seem to speed up. So, are we doomed?
Is that where
that's
goes?
going? I don't know. I don't think so. The rate is still relatively slow, and we're finding most of the things out there that could run into us, but it's just interesting it went up. Maybe a star passed by, nudged them from far, maybe some, I don't know. We'll have to find out why it happened. It's another mystery to solve. But Tony, something did impact out on the asteroid
That's right,
belt.
yeah. Between Mars and Jupiter is the main belt of asteroids, and every once in a while astronomers check up on the asteroids to make sure they're where they belong and measure their positions. And they were kind of surprised this month when asteroid Galt, which has been known for a long time, didn't look at all like a dot of light. It actually had this long tail. And we can just see the next image here. Here's a little movie. You can see another asteroid moving through the frame, and that's what they usually look like, a little moving dot. But the Galt has the long tail. So not only does it have a tail, but it's also in a slightly different orbit than it was before it grew a tail. So one likely explanation is there was a collision between Gault and another asteroid, and we're seeing the results of that.
You said the tail seems to be getting stronger now.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I didn't say it right now, but there was. I did see a notice yesterday that some observers think that it may be a little bit brighter than it was.
Interesting.
And also, closer to home, radio telescopes are another way we have of seeing detail on asteroids and other objects that come close to the Earth. So December and January have been very busy with these. First of all, we have an asteroid called 2003 SD220. And in December, it came, catchy. It came about 1.6 million miles from Earth, and radio telescopes were able to get images showing details. And kind of looks like something.
Hippopotamus for Christmas.
I think you got it. And I
there
heard
was-
several other people, too.
Anybody that
Yeah,
knows
yeah,
it gets a
yeah.
sticker. Yeah, or whatever you
We
like.
Don't be
couldn't hear, it was
shy.
too much,
We have
yeah.
a lot of stuff there. Okay.
So another one was seen as well, though.
That's
They imaged
right.
more than one.
Here's a near-Earth approaching asteroid called 2016 AZ8, which has been seen before, but not with its moon. This came about 2.7 million miles away. This asteroid's only about 1,300 feet across, and about that same distance from it is the moon. So, and then finally, remember in December there's a really bright comet. Well, if you were out of the city and had binoculars, it was pretty bright. Called Virtanen, and Arecibo got this image of its nucleus. The nucleus, the icy core of the comet's about 0.9 miles across, 0.9 of a mile across.
So also in late December, we had a big holiday, wishing everybody Happy New Year. And if you were here last month, you know that we celebrated the mission New Horizons that flew past an object in the very outer solar system. New Horizons is well known for being the mission that took these beautiful pictures of Pluto, but it flew right on by, it didn't go into orbit, and went to this object, follow that red line, to something called MU69, or Ultima Thule is its nickname. And here's a little artist conception ahead of time of what it might have looked like going past. So the flyby took place New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, depending on which side of the midnight you were. Here are the artists, the scientists, it's the same thing. Very excitedly waiting for the first image to come back, and we showed you this last month. That's the image that came back. So then Ultima Thule and New Horizons went behind the sun. And so we didn't get any more data, but there was a little image processing that went on. All these images that were taken were then made into this movie, so you can pretend you are New Horizons flying up to the object. They also did one where they kept the size the same, but we got to see the rotation of the object. It appears to get more and more in focus, because as we get closer and closer, the resolution gets better, but they deliberately kept it the same size, just to make it look like, so we can see the rotation. And then just last week, they released, because the data are coming back in a very slow stream, their first next best image. And yeah, there's so much going on in this image that right at the neck, the fact that these two lobes seem to be co-joined in some fashion there's a lot of physics and a lot of information about the early solar system in that. But you can see these depressions that look like they could be meteor strikes, or I don't want to say meteor strikes, but more like, that something hit it. But people think that to create a cavity that large that you might hit it and break it apart. And so there's analysis of that yet to be done. It could also be that it just collapsed because there is ice beneath it and the surface collapsed. There's also this fantastic round thing. Like, what is that? I don't know what that is, and no one does, and there are streaks coming off of it. So this is very interesting because it's telling us something about the very, very ancient material in our solar system, the stuff that made up the planets that has now, in you and me, used to sit in chunks of stuff that looked like this. So that's a picture of you from 4.6 billion years ago, but just preserved in the cold outer solar system. And now you're a little bit rearranged, but it's fundamentally the idea that this is what Earth and everything on it was made of in its earliest, most pristine form. So stay tuned. There will continue to be new results from New Horizons all year long.
Is that like a short period comet? If it came towards the sun, would that be considered a short period comet?
If it fell into the sun, it would be probably pretty comparatively short period as opposed to the super long period ones that are way out there. But its orbit, that's for the 4,100,000,000 and whatever that number was. That's how far away it is.
Does Halley's Comet get out past that? I mean, Halley's Comet.
I don't think so.
Not quite
Don't
that far.
think so.
It passes Neptune's orbit, but
Yeah.
not out past.
But you make a good point. A lot of comets do come from that region of the solar system called the Kuiper Belt, and they fall in, build a tail, and that's that.
That one hasn't fallen yet.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah.
So it's pristine because when they fall in, they get processed by the sun. They heat up, they lose gases and stuff, and that's why we want to see something that hasn't been processed by the inner solar system. So
Yeah.
with that,
Yeah, with that, we'd like to
see some processed solar system.
see some processed solar
items?
system items. Come on, Kara, and we'd like to invite our first guest, Sharmila Bhattcharya, is how you say your last name, I believe. And she's going to speak from the lectern up here. So welcome our guest, our first guest.
Turn
Yeah,
on
we can
the
scoot
microphone. There we go.
She should be mic'd.
I think I'm mic'd, yeah? Right, you can hear me. All right, well, firstly, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. I'm a huge fan of the movie La La Land, which, as you know, features Griffith Observatory prominently, and I've actually never been here before. So, yeah, so thank you. And then I've known David Reitzel here for 25 years, so it's a real pleasure for me to be back here with friends and family in this amazing venue. So today I'm going to talk to you about how these genetically small model organisms can actually tell us a lot about humans going into deep space. And so one of the things that I want to start with is what are some of the challenges that we anticipate that an astronaut who is going to Mars or is going to the moon, what are some of the challenges that they're going to face? And one of them is definitely radiation. And radiation comes in a couple of flavors that we worry about in terms of biology. One of them is galactic cosmic radiation. And what that is actually consists of these highly ionizing, highly energetic charged particles like carbon, oxygen, silicon, iron, etc., that can come at a biological system and cause a lot of damage in our cells. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. These particles are also very hard to shield against. So that's another consideration for when you're sending humans out there. You know, what kind of shielding will you need? How will you bring that about? And then the other kind of particles could be solar particle events. So for example, there could be coronal mass ejections, and these result in protons that are spewed out by the sun, and they could actually result in almost 100-fold or 1,000 times more radiation than background levels. Now, these are slightly easier to shield against compared to the galactic cosmic radiation, but the problem is that they're highly unpredictable. So, you know, an astronaut may want to go do a spacewalk, but then there's a coronal mass ejection, and that could cause a lot of damage to the biological system. So far, what do we know? What are the limits of our, okay, hang on, there's an error message on my screen. Oh, it says it isn't responding. Do you want to? Oh, okay. So. There we go. Okay, thanks. So what are the limits of what we have tested so far in terms of humans being in space? So we have gone into deep space. Oh, before I actually go to that, let me just bring this aspect up, which is this little blue marble that you see here is us, the Earth. And as you know, we're protected by this magnetic shell that's around us, this magnetosphere that's something like 385. Actually, this is about 58,000 kilometers above us. And the good thing of that, this magnetic sphere, is that we are protected from some of these charged particles from coming and hitting us when we're on the Earth's surface. But and even when we're on the International Space Station, we're still within this belt. But when we want to go to Moon or when we want to go to Mars, then we're going beyond this area. And so the limit so far is we've done lunar missions, and you'll hear more about the Apollo mission later today. But these were relatively short missions. Now, we've done long duration missions, so astronauts have been on the International Space Station. They've been on the Russian space station for a year and a half. But then those are, again, at lower Earth orbit with less of the radiation albedo. So then the question is, for biologists, for us to be ready to be sending astronauts into space, what are some of the things that we need to know and be prepared for? So Raja, your computer's doing this again. Sorry, guys.
Oh, no.
So it says it isn't responding. Do you want to wait or quit?
I think we should start it over. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
It seems to have gone forward again. Do you think that's okay?
Yeah, okay. So I wonder why that's happening, but anyway. All right, so this particular mission that I'm going to tell you about is called BioSentinel. And the way, so what we're going to do for BioSentinel, this is a mission that's flying in 2020 that we're preparing right now. It's going to be the first biological study beyond low Earth orbit since the Apollo years 50 years ago. And then it'll also be the very first CubeSat. So the other advantage of doing experiments in a small envelope is that they're lower mass, they're easier to send up there, and so CubeSats have become very popular. So this will be the first CubeSat that we're going to send up with a biological experiment on it. And the way it's going to work is that we're sending our payload package, which is pretty much this big, as a secondary payload on the SLS, the Space Launch System. This is a heavy lift rocket, a little bit like the first starting launch video that you guys saw. So it's NASA's building this heavy lift capability to get us to Moon and Mars. And so our experiment is going to be a piggyback experiment. And on the maiden voyage of the SLS rocket, on the EM-1 mission, we're going to go up with them, and then when the rocket goes around the Moon and comes back, our experiment will get flung out towards the sun, and we're going to do our experiment for at least 6 months to a year, and in 6 months we're going to be almost a third of the way to the sun. We'll be at 40 million kilometers. And then, of course, EM-1 comes back, but we stay out there, and all of our science data comes back by telemetry. So all of the data that we will use will be by analysis, and I'll tell you exactly what our experiment will be about. So for starters, you may ask, okay, so what's the biological system that you're going to use to test the effect of this radiation, this deep space radiation? We're going to use yeast cells, and these are actually the yeast cells that you would use to brew beer or to make bread. And of course, this is a highly magnified image. Usually these cells are 3 to 4 microns in diameter. But what's interesting is that their DNA, so the genetic material that's in their cell, is actually very similar to our cells and to our DNA, the way the chromosomes are arranged and so on. And so what happens is this deep space ionizing radiation that we were talking about causes double-stranded breaks in the DNA. And that's one of the reasons we were saying that this radiation can be very damaging, and we need to understand the biological effect of these particles. And also, the other factor here is that it isn't very easy to mimic this deep space radiation on Earth. We are doing a lot of studies on Earth at Brookhaven National Laboratory, where we're building up a database of what these yeast cells will do when we have a specific defined amount of radiation and a particle type. But in space, we'll have a mixture of particle types coming at us. There'll be some amount of randomness and unpredictability as to what's hitting us. And so that's why it's important, side by side with the Earth-based data, to get the data from missions such as these. And so in other words, to summarize, we're going to use yeast cells as biosensors to measure the effect of deep space radiation. Now, how are we going to do that? So it's a simple idea, and it has to be that way because, again, all our data is, we're not sending astronauts to do the experiments out there. This is going very, very deep into space. And so we're using 3 LED lights, so 3 wavelengths of light. And what they're measuring in each case is one of them, the infrared LED, actually measures the growth of the cells. So it measures how quickly the cells are going to double. So that gives us an estimation of the health and growth capability of the cells. And the other 2 LEDs actually measure the color change of this dye, which goes from blue to pink to clear. And the way that happens is as the cells, just like our cells, as we use up sugars and other nutrients in our media, and we do the various jobs that our cells do, we also secrete stuff into the media. And those things change color in a predictable fashion. And so by measuring these, the color change and the change in these 3 wavelengths of light, essentially what we're doing is we're quantifying the effect that radiation is having on the cells in terms of growth and viability and health. So you can imagine for a group of cells that have been hit by a lot of radiation, you might get a lot of death, or the cells may be less healthy, and that will impact how they're going to grow and metabolize. And that's what we will be measuring in a quantitative fashion.
The cells are about room temperature?
Very good question. Yes. So normally these yeast cells, we would grow them in the lab here at 30 C. But because in space these satellites are cold biased, we actually do have them at room temperature, which is fine too. They will grow there. They just grow slower than at 30, but they function. So this is an exploded view of the satellite, just to show you. It has, of course, it's an autonomous, it has to be. It generates its own power, it does all the telemetry, it orients, it can detect the sun, it orients in the correct direction, and all of that. And so our biology that I was talking to you about, the yeast cells actually are housed here, along with the nutrient media and things that we have now tested for up to 2 years to make sure that they will work when we send them into space. And alongside the biology, we also have a physical dosimeter. So we have what is called an LET spectrometer that will measure the particle types, the energies, and how many of those particles are coming at us at a given time. So the interesting thing is then we can compare the readings from this dosimeter with the changes that we see in our biology, and we can cross-correlate with the data as we see, how the radiation is affecting the biology. We can compare it with the readings from this dosimeter. So with that, I'm now going to shift to, because I want to give you a little bit of a few vignettes of some different organisms that we can use to understand different facets of human health and physiology. So the fruit fly, or the Drosophila melanogaster as it's called, literally the fruit flies that will buzz around your rotting bananas, are actually an extremely useful tool for biologists. And if you compared the genes, the collection of genes that are in each of your cells in your body, with those of a fruit fly, you would actually find that if you picked out all the genes in the humans that you know are important for function, because if you get a mutation, you get a manifested human disease like Alzheimer's or diabetes, etc. If you take that subset of genes in the human, compared with the yeast genome, you find a 75% match. And so with the fruit fly, which is this much smaller organism, it actually makes it very easy to do spaceflight experiments. Because in a box this big, I send up maybe tens of flies, and I get back thousands of flies. And so you can get an entire group of individuals that were born entirely from the egg to the adult in space, and you can look at what gravity, in this case, we were looking at the effects of gravity largely on the fruit fly. These experiments we were doing were on the International Space Station. And I'll show you some data in a second. And before I do that, let me just also mention that the other real big advantage of having a large sample size, when I say that I get back thousands of flies, why is that so important? The reason is that, as I'll show you in a second, when you have astronauts up there, you may have a crew of 4 or 6 people. You have people who are young, middle-aged, some who are older. You have men, you have women, you have people from, you have astronauts going up from the US, you have cosmonauts, you have, European astronauts, you have Brazilian, Chinese, so there's such a diversity of the genetic makeup, even between siblings. You have so much of a difference in genome, makeup, or the genes that you're made of, that it's very hard with humans, even when you extract blood and get data, it's often hard to come up with, sort of a reliable readout of what the changes will be, because you might react one way and I may not, or vice versa. So with fruit flies, this collection that we get back are all genetically identical. And so in the next example I'm going to show you, that size actually does help us tremendously. So this example that I was going to show you is an experiment that we did a few years ago, actually on the space shuttle, one of the last few space shuttles that were going to fly. And we were using the fruit fly to understand innate immune system. So the innate immune system is actually what your body, so our body also, kicks into gear the immune system when we're attacked by pathogens, whether it's bacteria, virus, fungus. These things protect us from getting sick, and it helps us feel better. So fruit flies have the same mechanism, and one of the ways it works is, if you look here, in the green circles are blood cells, and these little orange circles or dots that are inside are bacterial cells. So what happens when you get a bacterial infection is our blood gets into action, engulfs these bacterial cells, phagocytose they're called, and inactivates and kills them. And then you start to feel better. So look what happened with the flies when we had them develop entirely in space. What we find in the dark gray bar there is that there is a shift to the right, which means that the flies that developed entirely in space were somewhat compromised for this innate immune function. So what happened is the number of cells that were actively engulfing these bacterial particles was smaller at any given time compared to flies, their own sibling, that were identically housed in the same hardware and treated in every other way exactly the same, except that they were grown on the ground instead of in space. And you'll find that there was a shift. Now, this is where, again, and here what you see is that if you look at the number of bacteria that each of the blood cells can engulf, with time, there is a diminution of the number of bacterial cells that each of the blood cells can capture. So in other words, to summarize that, what you're seeing is spaceflight has resulted. So when the flies came back from space and we gave them an infection, what we found is that they were a little bit worse off at fighting the infection. It took them longer. They were slower at it than their siblings that hadn't gone to space. And here again is where the numbers come in. If you look at the statistics, because we have such large population sizes, even though the change may be small, but it's significant. And so when you think about if an astronaut is going to Mars and it's going to take him or her 3 years to get to Mars and come back, in that period of time, even if you see a decrement of their immune system by 10 or 20%, over that long period of time, you can imagine that can become a problem. And these are some of the reasons why we're interested. Yes, please.
Do you find a rebound in future generations of the flies?
Yes, we do actually. And in fact, for this particular experiment, because we didn't have enough flies, we weren't able to wait very much longer, but we waited for another couple of weeks and we found that they started to behave pretty much like the sibling flies. So yes. And we've also done that study with some other things that we looked at, like behavioral changes, and they did bounce back with time.
Was the bouncing back after they had returned to ground?
After they had returned to ground, yeah. In fact, these changes we were also measuring after they returned to ground, just because it's just easier to do it. But you know, that's a good question you guys asked, because if you did it in space, you might see an even bigger change. Because by the time you get our samples back, it's a couple of days after landing, or maybe the fastest we'd get it back is, you know, a day after landing, and so.
Could you contribute the decline because of stress or because of radiation?
Now that's an excellent question. And so in this particular case, I'd have to say that I would guess that it's an overall stress. So I would say that it's probably not radiation specific. The reason being that on the ISS, the radiation levels are still somewhat lower. I still think, though, in other assays, we do see radiation-related effects. But the way we're doing this assay, the chances are the more the effect is a gravity effect. But that's an excellent, you know, that's part of the thing is, you know, deconvolving those things. So one of the experiments that we just flew a few months ago that I'm going to talk to in a second is actually, hang on, I can't see the video here. Okay, good. Phew. All right, so there we had a centrifuge on the ISS. So there you can control for gravity by having a 1G in space. And so we're actually going to get data from that in the next few months, and that will help answer questions such as what you just asked. All right, so here what I'm showing you is another example, and this is actually related to exactly as the gentleman asked, to an experiment that we just did a few months ago and that we're actually analyzing the data now. But I want to show you how useful the system can be and how much you can learn in the future about it. So the cardiovascular system, so the circulation system, our hearts and how the blood circulates, this is an area where the fruit fly heart is not exactly identical to the human heart, but there are a lot of elements that are very similar, so much so that you actually can learn an incredible amount from this system. And so this is work of my collaborators that I'm showing you here, Bodmer and Oker, who are nearby in La Jolla. And what you see in red here is a schematic. If you look from the top at a Drosophila, in red here is the circulatory system. And what I'm going to show you in a second is how the heart beats in the fly. But before that, let me just tell you that if you looked at human population data, you would find that the older, if you looked at the entire population and you looked at the folks who are older, there's a higher probability that those people would have an arrhythmic heart. So your heart would probably beat not at as regular a rate as someone who's much younger, on an average. Now, obviously, there's always exceptions in genetics and so on, but on an average, that's the case, and that's the data that you're seeing here. Now, I want you to look at this video up here of the fruit fly heart beating. There you go. So this is it's a muscular tube-like organ. This part is the heart. And as it beats, the blood will flow through the organism. And that's what you just saw, which was a really regular heartbeat, was a 1-week-old fly. So the equivalent of a 10-year-old child. Now watch what happens. Yeah. Here you go. So now what? See that? Yes, and that's a 7-week-old fly, the equivalent of a 70-year-old human. So in other words, what we're showing you here is that exactly like you see in the human population, you can sort of recreate that in the flies. This is the genetically identical organism, except much older, and you see that arrhythmia. So just like folks on Earth are using the system to understand the effects of aging on heart function, we're actually, in collaboration with this group, we're looking at the effect of spaceflight on heart function on animals that have developed entirely in space. So we just got the flies back. We got hundreds and thousands of flies back just a few months ago, and so stay tuned. You know, we're doing that work right now. And then I wanted to end by saying that, as you know, science is a team sport. And so there's a lot of people that need to work together to make this all happen. So an acknowledgement to my team. And with that, I think I'll end.
All right, now we'd like to welcome Raja GuhaThakurta, Professor Raja GuhaThakurta from UC Santa Cruz. Thank you. And we'll switch topics just a little bit. He'll be speaking about galaxies and cannibalism, and we'll see here.
Can you hear me okay? The back?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, let's hope PowerPoint and my computer behave, let's see. All right. I'm good over here. Thank you. All right, so a long time ago, in a fruit fly far, far away. Wait, that's the wrong talk. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, we're going to make a transition from the teensy-weensy things Mila talked about to some very large objects. And I'm going to talk about galaxies, and I'm going to talk about the dark matter that binds them. This is going to sound like Lord of the Rings, but the same dark matter that causes them to cannibalize other galaxies. The only kind of cannibalism I'm going to talk about involves galaxies, not humans. And I'm going to talk about how the periodic table of elements, something that Laura referred to, these elements that, or I think Patrick, you referred to this, the elements found in the moon. I'm going to talk about how these came to be. I'm not going to have time to talk about how young people, high school students, participate in some of the research I'm going to talk about today, but if you ask me afterwards. This is something I'm very interested in. I've been talking to David and Laura about the school program here at Griffith and what synergy there might exist between these programs. So I work on galaxies, and you're probably wondering, wow, that's oddly specific. You know, why does he work only on galaxies? Why not planets, stars, black holes? You know, there's so many other cool things in the universe. And I will argue that there aren't any cooler things in the universe than galaxies.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, thank you. So galaxies are important because because they're basic building blocks of the universe. Just like atoms are basic building blocks of matter, galaxies are basic building blocks of the cosmos. And you know, this looks like one of these SAT analogy things where atoms are not the biggest or smallest building blocks of matter. The floorboards over here, or the granite blocks that make up this building, they're bigger building blocks, and certainly there are particles that are much smaller than atoms. Electrons and protons are smaller, quarks are even smaller than protons. They're not the smallest nor the largest building blocks, but they're the most important because the discovery of the processes that bind atoms together, the physics of atoms, led to huge advances in understanding of the structure of matter itself. In the same way, galaxies are not the smallest or biggest building blocks, but they're really important because if it weren't for the fact that we are part of a galaxy, part of a large galaxy actually, we wouldn't have complex life here on Earth. All space considered would be a far less interesting show because you know, you'd be made of hydrogen and helium, you know, so would all of us, and you know, life would be far less interesting. So I want to explain a little bit more about, I want to back up this statement by talking a little bit about the evidence, the line of logic that leads us to to believe that we really needed to be part of a big galaxy to be the way we are as complex human beings. So I'm going to talk about our place in the cosmos, and when I say our, you could imagine your picture up there. I'm going to imagine my son reclining on the carpet there. There he is. So my story applies to humans, but it also applies to dogs, cats, it applies to the simplest living things we can think of, so simplest virus or bacteria to the most complex mammals. What is common to them is our biology is heavily reliant on complex molecules. Molecules like proteins, molecules like DNA, RNA, these are many hundreds, if not thousands of atoms strung together or connected together, not strung together, connected together into these complex molecules. I would argue that the complexity of these molecules is directly related to the complexity, diversity, and richness of life on Earth, of the form and function of life on Earth. You really couldn't build complex things, complex living things, or complex anything if you just had simple molecules to work with, if you just had molecules like water or carbon dioxide to work with. Now, to form complex molecules like this, you need to have atoms that can form multiple chemical bonds. See, hydrogen has one electron. It's like a one-armed atom. It can hold another atom. That's all it can do. So it can form the end of a molecular chain, but it can't be a central entity in a complex atom. Helium has 2 electrons, 2 arms, but it doesn't like to use its arms at all. It's inert. It doesn't like to hold any hands. So, with hydrogen and helium, we'd really be sunk. Lithium has 3 electrons, beryllium has 4, but it starts to get interesting when you get up to things like carbon, 6 electrons, nitrogen has 7, oxygen has 8. Now, these are these multi-armed atoms that can form the centers or can form key nodes in these complex molecules. So we refer to life as carbon-based life for these sorts of reasons. Now, you don't need to look very far to find these elements. If you look on the Earth, you can find carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. If you're wearing a diamond ring, if you're lucky enough to be wearing a diamond ring, you're carrying carbon around. If you're breathing, which I hope you are, you're taking in nitrogen and oxygen all the time. Barbecue grill, swimming in the ocean. These are ways in which we experience these elements all the time. These are key components of large molecules, large complex molecules. So if you want to understand the origin of life, you have to understand the origin of elements like these. And early on, people wondered whether our parent star, the sun, is capable of producing these large complex atoms through nuclear fusion reactions. This was an important question early on. And do people know the answer to this question? How many yeses do we have in the house? How many no's? How many maybes? And okay, how about let's start with maybe. No, let's start with no. Can we have a show of hands for the answer is no? Okay, how about yeses? Okay, how about I have no idea what you're talking about. No, all right, sorry, no, okay, no. Okay, so the answer is no. The sun is undergoing fusion reactions, but it's only doing one very boring reaction, which is it's converting hydrogen to helium. In fact, helium was discovered in the sun, and the name helium comes from the Greek word for the sun, helios. So the sun has been converting hydrogen to helium, the first element of the periodic table to the second element, and it's been doing this for the entire 4.5 billion years of its existence. So the sun is a very boring cook. It's been one recipe, hydrogen to helium. It's a very slow cook. It's been doing this for 4.5 billion years. Now, so how did we get to the point where why does the Earth have these elements? And in fact, why does the sun have all these elements? The sun has all of the elements that you see in the periodic table. Those were discovered here on Earth, but they're also present in the sun. And the answer is because they're part of our inheritance. The Earth and sun were born out of a cloud like this. This is an actual picture of a nebula. But the Earth and sun were born out of clouds like this that already contained these elements in the periodic table. So they're part of our inheritance. Now, if you're thinking like a scientist, it's not enough to be told you have this wealth because you were born with it. That's not a good answer because you want to find out how your ancestors garnered this wealth. So in an astronomical context, we want to find out how this nebula came to have all these key elements in the periodic table, and we have to look to the ancestors of the sun. Ancestors. What I mean by that, stars that lived and died before the sun and Earth came into being. what you're seeing here is a picture of a star field in the Milky Way galaxy that contains a variety of stars. You see stars of different colors. The red stars are the coolest, only in a temperature sense, because the sun, after all, is the coolest star in the universe. But the red stars have temperatures of 2,000, 3,000 Kelvin. The sun is 6,000. And the bluish-white stars have temperatures of 10,000, 20,000 Kelvin. These bluish-white stars burn very hot. They're very massive. And compared to the sun, they're much more rapid as cooks. They're much more versatile as cooks. So what they can do in a matter of 1 billion years or even 100 million years or less, they can cook through fusion reactions. They can cook through the first 26 elements of the periodic table. Hydrogen to helium, lithium, beryllium, boron. Don't worry, I'm not going to go up to the 26th. I can't. But the 26th element is iron, Fe. It can cook all those elements in its interior. So these massive stars are more versatile cooks, and they're more rapid cooks. And very importantly, they're very generous cooks. At the ends of their lives, they explode. So these things that they cooked are distributed through the surroundings, and they turn into these spectacular explosions called supernovae. You're going to see one appear here. This is a picture of an actual supernova taken about 1,000 years after the explosion. Now, this explosion has this wonderful effect of dispersal, disperses these elements through the surroundings into these clouds of gas and dust out of which new stars are born. But there's another very important aspect to this explosion. These explosions are so energetic that even endothermic nuclear fusion reactions, things that are energy eating, even those reactions take place because there's just so much energy available. So elements that are above iron in the periodic table, all the elements we know of in the periodic table, are produced during these explosions, especially the ones above iron that cannot be produced during the lifetime of a star are produced during the explosive death of massive stars. So important for two reasons. Again, the production of elements heavier than iron, so above 26 in terms of atomic number, and the dispersal of elements. Now, there's one bad thing about an explosion. So much energy that if you're a small galaxy, that explosion can take these wonderful elements and kick them out of the galaxy. So one of the things we've done, this is work with some of my later PhD students after David, Evan Kirby's work in particular, he's at Caltech, is if you look at small galaxies, small in size, small in mass, their gravity is so weak that these exploding stars eject the material completely from the galaxy. The galaxy doesn't benefit from having hosted these stars. So the next generation isn't the beneficiary of the elements produced in the previous generation. So what we see is these low-mass galaxies are much more anemic in terms of their periodic table of elements content compared to stars in the Milky Way. So we not only had to be part of a family of stars in order to be complex life forms today, we had to be part of a very large family of stars with lots of dark matter to hold back, to bring back the explosion of supernovae. The supernovae are not energetic enough to completely escape from our galaxy. The material rains back in. And so here's a picture of a large galaxy. This is not the Milky Way galaxy, if you already know this. This is a surrogate, this is a vicarious view of what our galaxy might look like. We don't have a long enough selfie stick, so we can't take pictures of this of the Milky Way. So this is our Andromeda galaxy, and our view of the Andromeda galaxy is very similar to what the Milky Way might look like from Andromeda. So this is about 100,000 light years across, 100,000. This isn't the entire galaxy. One of the things we've discovered, starting with David's work, is the Andromeda galaxy is about 5 times bigger than this picture shows, and 5 times bigger than people previously thought. So now imagine waking up one day and finding you're 5 times bigger than you were, than you thought you were. You can't get out of your bedroom door. You're going to bump into things, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Not about you getting 5 times bigger, but about galaxies being 5 times bigger than people previously thought. So 100,000 light years across, and the other number I'll give you is galaxies like the Andromeda and Milky Way galaxy are made up of about 100 billion stars, so one with 11 zeros after it. And if this were the Milky Way, we wouldn't be in downtown LA. We wouldn't be way off in, I don't know, Riverside, we'd probably be in, a place like Griffith Observatory, somewhere not quite in the heart of the galaxy and not quite out in the suburbia. We are about 25,000 light years from the center of the Milky Way. And I could lie and tell you there's a lovely picture of the solar system right there. I could, and I wouldn't know it, you wouldn't know it, because the solar system on this scale is tiny. The solar system, the entire solar system, you're talking about New Horizons and all of that, is a few hours of light travel time. This picture is 100,000 years of light travel time. That's why if you had a picture of the solar system in there, you'd need a very large magnifying glass to see it. You couldn't really see it easily. Now, you can take pictures of the Milky Way from the inside, and I'm about to show you such a picture. This was taken by John Rockman, physics teacher in Palo Alto. He took a series of images, 30 seconds apart, and stitched them together into a movie of the Milky Way swinging by. The Milky Way appearing to swing by as the Earth rotates. So that's what you're going to see here. So you see this band of gas and dust that appears to sweep across our sky, appears to rotate. And you'll notice that as the movie progresses, you can see clouds, lightning, you can see streaks of shooting stars, you can see trees fluttering, you can see the sky getting darker as we get further and further away from sunset. And you can guess from the fact that the Milky Way started out horizontal, the fact that it's vertical now, this is about a 6-hour sequence, a little less than 6 hours, because in 6 hours, the Milky Way would go from horizontal to vertical, and then upside down in another 6 hours, and then vertical again, and then back. So it's a little less than a quarter of a 24-hour cycle. Again, beautiful movie. John Rockman shared this with me a few years ago. Now, so the Milky Way has also been found to be quite a bit larger than people previously thought. I study the Milky Way now. I use the Keck telescopes a lot to study the Milky Way and other galaxies. But I really fell in love with galaxies studying the Milky Way's neighbor, the Andromeda Galaxy. This is the picture you saw earlier. The Andromeda Galaxy is about 2.5 million light years away. It has a couple of companions there that you see in this picture. The one at 4 o'clock has the romantic name of M32. The one at 12 o'clock is NGC 205. And what we've studied, and this is again the work of another PhD student, Phil Choi at Pomona College. He used to be a PhD student at Santa Cruz, has studied how these small galaxies are being ripped by Andromeda. They get ripped because the near end of the galaxy is being pulled harder than the far end, so they stretch out the galaxy. You can actually see the stretching of the upper galaxy if you look closely. You can see this sort of vertical, very faint but vertical band of light through the upper galaxy. To study this galaxy, I used the same telescope that Laura got to use recently. This is the Keck telescopes on Mauna Kea. You'll see them coming into view. This is a picture taken by Laurie Hatch, a beautiful Mauna Kea sunset. And that telescope on the right is where that man's PhD thesis started on the 2nd of October, 1996. I remember it because it was the second day of operation of that telescope. The telescope went into operation on the 1st of October, 1996, and we got to use it on the second day. That's 1996 today. I mean, I used the Keck telescope 2 nights ago on the 29th, or 3 nights ago on the 29th of January. So I've been using it every few weeks since that time, and it's been painstaking work, but it's been absolutely the most fun I've had doing science. So David was my first PhD student, and so it's all very special. I wanted to bring this story back to you. Now, the Keck telescopes are expensive, powerful. They're arguably the most expensive ground-based telescope. So you'll notice we've carefully put them on top of a volcano in Hawaii. So I'm really fortunate to have used it for 20-some years, but who knows when that'll all come to an end. Okay, so I've used these telescopes to study Andromeda, get a detailed view, and one of the things we study is this cannibalism of small galaxies by Andromeda. And I want to give you an idea of what happens when galaxies cannibalize each other. The cannibalism process of one galaxy by another is very slow. It takes a long time. It takes a few billion years, actually. So we can't watch a single system go through this. It just takes too much time. What we can do instead is see snapshots of different galaxies at different stages of the cannibalism process. The other thing we can do is speed up time on a computer, that is build mock galaxies, let the forces of gravity run and see what cannibalism does. So that's what I'm going to do next, is show you computer simulations of colliding galaxies, and I'm going to compare them to actual pictures of colliding galaxies. So let's see if this movie works. We start out with two galaxies that are frisbee-shaped, and right as they approach each other, we stop the simulation, and here are two real galaxies that are about to collide. This is an actual pair of galaxies. We go back to the computer simulation, and you see that their gravity brings them closer, and they start intersecting. In fact, they're intersecting at this point, and again, we stop our computer simulation right there. We change our perspective until we get to there. And here is a second pair of galaxies that are further along in the collision process. Different pair, not the first pair, second pair. We go back to the computer simulation, and you see the stretching I'm talking about. The near end is being pulled harder than the far end. You see the stretching, and we stop our computer simulation. Here's a real third pair of galaxies going through the collision process. The main bodies of the two galaxies start falling back together. This is the computer simulation again. Just before they merge, the central bodies, we stop our computer simulation, change our perspective, and here's a fourth pair of galaxies going through the collision process. Now, the simulations are, of course, designed to mimic these specific systems. The two parts merge. The central parts of the galaxies, they merge. Again, we stop the computer simulation, change our perspective, and finally, here's a fifth pair of real galaxies going through this process. Now, these five pairs are part of something called the Tumre sequence. Alar and Yuri Tumre, brothers, originally from Estonia, came here and did the first computer simulations of colliding galaxies. They found these five pairs. The computer simulation you saw is a much more modern and detailed simulation, of course. So you might think, okay, galaxy collisions are great. What does that have to do with me? Why should I care? And I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. Okay, so why you should care has a lot to do with this galaxy over here. This is the Andromeda Galaxy again. This is the full moon to scale. The full moon is large. You can see it very clearly, but the full moon is bright, and Andromeda doesn't look this good to the naked eye because of its low brightness, low contrast against the sky. It's not its size. It's much bigger than the full moon in terms of angular size. It's much bigger than the full moon in real size, of course, but it's also bigger than the full moon in angular size. So I've been part of this survey called FAT, I'm not being derogatory to the PI over there. No, that's not, it's called the Panchromatic Hubble Andromeda Treasury, and Julianne Del Canton, who was a colleague of mine when I was a grad student at Princeton, she started this survey at the University of Washington. A group of us at Santa Cruz worked with her on this project. What you're going to see there is a white outline that represents the area that the Hubble telescope covered of Andromeda. Now, it took 828 orbits of Hubble around the Earth to collect those images. It collected about 3,000 images that were stitched together into a digital mosaic. It's the largest digital mosaic that Hubble has ever taken. And what better place than to take a picture of part of the Andromeda Galaxy? It's only a part of the Andromeda Galaxy. This is special to me because, this Andromeda has been a love affair for me for many, many years. And my students and I were the first to take digital CCD mosaics of Andromeda. People had taken photographic plates, they had taken single images, but my students and I took the first digital image. We took 57 images back in 1990, and some students of mine stitched the image together. But this is 3,000 images with a much better telescope, with the Hubble telescope. Let's see how good the telescope is. Let's take a look. So there's the arc of the Milky Way across. There's Andromeda, the tiny speck 2.5 million light years away. But what we're going to do is we're going to zoom into Andromeda based on this Hubble image mosaic. So fasten your seat belts because we're going to zoom a long way. And these are all actual images of Andromeda. We're going to keep zooming, until you realize that Andromeda is made up of stars just like the Milky Way. The same mix of colors that you saw in that earlier star field in Andromeda is right there in the Milky Way is right there in Andromeda as well. Andromeda is very much our twin. You can see some dark patches. If you have good eyes, you can see dark patches. Those are clouds of gas and dust where Andromeda is being, light of Andromeda stars are being blocked, just like a cloud in the sky might block the light of the sun. Now, based on these images and based on other images taken with Hubble, we made a shocking discovery in 2012. So I told you, we discovered that Andromeda was 5 times bigger than people previously thought. That discovery was in 2005. In 2012, 7 years later, we were part of another group that discovered that Andromeda was heading straight for us. So as they say, astronomers wondered why Andromeda was getting bigger and bigger, and then it hit us, for a long time, one of the 3 components of Andromeda's motion has been known. The Z component has been known. In 2012, we measured the X and Y components, and we're actually trying to refine that measurement as we speak. But we really made the shocking discovery that Andromeda is coming to us, straight for us. So NASA got very excited about all this. They said, we have a limited amount of time because Andromeda is coming. So let's put together a little video to show what Andromeda is going to look like in the future. Because, normally astronomy, you think about the past, but let's talk about the future. What is the future Milky Way-Andromeda collision going to look like? So again, there's the Milky Way. There's Andromeda up there. This is what it looks like today. But let's see what the future brings. So this is today. In a couple billion years, Andromeda, like I said, is going to be bigger. Wait for 3 or 4 billion years. There's a spectacular collision with the Milky Way. 4 billion years, it's a mess. 5, 6. In 6 billion years, they're still separate entities. By 7, the 2 galaxies have merged into a new galaxy, for which we already have a name. The sun won't be there, that's right, but we'll get to that in a minute. But this galaxy, this new galaxy already has a name. It's called Milkomeda because it's the Milky Way and Andromeda. Okay. So NASA made a huge mistake in making this movie, right? In 7 billion years, these rocks on the hillside have not weathered. But you can see the collision is spectacular. I can bet we're going to stop celebrating the 4th of July because, we'll have this long-lasting display of cosmic fireworks in the sky. But to really enjoy these fireworks, as you say, we'll have to do a bit of work. We have to make sure we survive a world controlled by crazy politicians. That's the first thing, the first order of business. We have to survive killer diseases, maybe the medical miracles around the corner, because living for 7 billion years is it's going to take a lot. We have to survive the rapidly degrading environment. That's another challenge. And as you said, the sun's going to bloat up into a red giant, in a few billion years. It's going to engulf the Earth, so we have to escape outwards from the Earth. No point escaping inwards. That's only going to make it worse. We have to escape outwards. We have to go beyond Mars, because the sun's going to engulf the Earth. So we have to go beyond Mars, maybe to one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. And if we settle in there and not kill the place, like we're killing this place, we can sit back and really watch these cosmic fireworks unfold. That will be our reward for all the smartness it takes to get out there. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Now, we only have time for a couple of questions, if you'd like to address to either of our speakers. Sure.
So a question for her. You spoke about the need to protect humans in space from radiation. Has there been any research or work done towards duplicating the magnetic field of Earth, but on a smaller scale, to be able to take with us into space to protect?
Yeah, so in fact, I was talking to some of the engineers that I work with, and we were talking about this. And certainly in a smaller scale, it might be doable. So if you're looking at a mouse habitat or for animals like that, it might work. What they were telling me is that when you try it though for an entire spacecraft, or if you have some sort of a settlement or a colony somewhere in deep space, or like an ISS-like platform, just the amount of power and energy that it would take to actually do that becomes prohibitive. So realistically, it seems that it would be a real challenge to actually make it happen alongside all the other constraints that you have in going to space. But yeah, but you know, one of the things that actually they are looking at for shielding, well, two things that they're looking at for shielding is, you know, now that they're finding water on different, you know, surfaces and different bodies, that might be very promising because evidently hydrogenous material like that, like water, actually provides very good shielding for some of these particles. So, you know, so that's one. And then regolith, like lunar regolith, for example, might be another way in which you can sort of build a shelter type of a thing. So using materials that are found on the surfaces that you're going to go to might actually turn out to help or be easier to implement, in other words. Yes?
Would a cave on Mars provide adequate shielding, and have they found any caves on Mars?
You know, that's a really good question. I know that for the moon, because it's closer and you can actually you have enough lift capability to send up equipment to drill and do stuff like that. They are looking into doing it with lunar regolith. For Mars, I think it would, it's a very interesting question. And now that we have more of these robotic missions taking images, those would be an interesting thing to look out for. So that's a great question.
I think like lava tubes are the most likely.
Yeah, candidates.
Quick suggestion actually relating to this. You know, they should talk to the NASA artists who created that video. Those rocks would be very good. You know,
Yes.
I was wondering about with the fruit flies, when you were actually starting to collect the data on the transition to deep space, or was it whenever you actually arrived in deep space? Because I was curious if the transition was more stressful on the immune system than the actual existence of it.
Be there. That's a very good question. So for the fruit fly experiment, and I may not have made that very clear, we actually had to do all of the actual experimentation after they came back to Earth. So even though it was ISS, and we do have astronauts over there, they have very limited time, and also with no gravity, it's very hard for them to do the kind of injection experiments and stuff that we were doing with the flies. But it's an excellent question that, you know, what aspect of going to space, because there's a 3G, so hypergravity when you launch, then you get there, then you're in microgravity, and now you're on the ISS, your light cycle is now 90 minutes instead of every 12 hours. Your day-night is shifting. You know, you're far away from family and friends. You're in a very confined space. You're in an area, you know, perhaps just the small where we're sitting, and you're there for 6 months to a year, and you know, who knows if you get along with all those, you know, other people that you're with. And so there are a lot of stressors. And then there's hypergravity coming back down. And then, as you pointed out, there's radiation. And so there are a lot of things to help, you know, that we have to deconvolve and try and figure out which aspect causes, you know, more of the problems. And so related to the question that you asked earlier, you know, one of the ways we're trying to deal with that is having centrifuges on the ISS so you can start separating out gravity from radiation. And you can also preserve samples in space so that they don't go through the hypergravity of landing. Because now, you know, when we do our experiments on the SpaceX rockets, we've been landing in the ocean. So we go thump down in the ocean, then we get towed by a boat onto actually off of LA, at the LA airport, is where we go and we collect. So it comes from the dock to the LA airport, and then we go and collect our samples.
So being towed into the port of LA might reduce the immune system.
Right, the biggest stressor of them all.
Okay, last couple of questions for our guests. So we're here.
Galaxies collide, and we're living on Europa or something. Does that affect us? The galaxies colliding, will it affect the solar system?
No, you know, it won't because of the following reason. So when you look at a galaxy picture, it looks like it's studded with stars. It has a lot of stars, but there's actually a lot of empty space between stars. How much empty space? You know, the reason they look so star-studded is because we're not seeing the true sizes of stars. The stars look like blobs because of the finite blurring even within the Hubble telescope's camera. So that's one. And second, there's a lot of depth. Two stars that look close together are actually far apart along the line of sight. So galaxies are very empty spaces. I'll give you an exact analogy. If you take all stars in the galaxy, in the Milky Way galaxy, and shrink them down, sort of do it in a proper scaled way so that the sun becomes the size of a 1 centimeter marble. let's say you have the sun right here in LA in Griffith Observatory, the nearest star to the sun would be in Bakersfield. So a couple hundred kilometers away. I guess, a couple hundred kilometers away. So I guess it's 400 miles to Northern California, so it would be about halfway between here and the Bay Area. So marbles separated by 300 kilometers are not going to collide very easily. So even though that other galaxy is going to come through, it's literally going to come through. It's not going to strike. Someone once calculated that the probability of stars colliding is like letting two garden snails alone in the continental US, random places, and asking, what are the chances they're going to meet? No, I haven't had a chance to repeat this calculation. That person had way too much time on their hands. I didn't. But no. So the answer is no. Nothing bad will happen. We get to watch this. The sun may get ripped out of the Milky Way, but the planets will remain locked to the sun.
One last question. Over here, sure.
So you spoke about smaller galaxies not really being able to retain some of their heavier elements that are formed in their stars. So I'm wondering, is there like a certain size that a galaxy is so small that we can confidently say nothing very interesting forms there, such as anything complex molecularly?
That's an excellent question. It's a matter of degree, but the most anemic stars that have been found are about 100. Let me try to quantify. About 10,000 times more anemic than the sun. So the sun already is quite anemic in the sense that hydrogen and helium make up 98% of the sun. All the other elements of the periodic table put together make up only 2%. But there are stars that have been found specifically in these very small galaxies where that percentage of all the elements heavier than hydrogen and helium is not 2%, it's not 0.2%, it's not 0.02%, but it's down by a factor of 1,000. So it's a matter of degree. There's a continuous range between those stars that are the sun and stars that are even more, like 4% instead of 2%, stars that are more metal-rich than the sun. And so I think it's a matter of degree, and I think therefore it's going to be a matter of the degree of complexity of the entities you form. Whether they're living or non-living entities, the degree of complexity will be, I think, gradual. I don't think there's a break point.
Well, let's thank our guests one more time. So we do have just a couple of more stories before break, and we'll get through them quickly. But Patrick, you're going to tell us about something that's kind of important for all of you to know about, and it is this.
It is. So that's right. So something that we're very concerned with here in California are earthquakes. Last month, our mayor, Eric Garcetti, mayor of Los Angeles, announced the launch of an phone app called Shake LA. Basically, if you have it on your phone, you can get an alert and seconds or even up to a minute before you can actually feel the earth shake beneath your feet. So that's an incredible app, and it's available for Android and your iPhone. You got to update your iOS to make it work. We go to the next slide.
What am I going to do with 2 seconds?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah. No, why don't we just skip forward?
Yeah.
He's already made the point.
Yeah. So the earthquake early warning system, EEW, has been in effect with these countries, and the color coding shows the intensity of earthquakes around these countries. So it is important to have this particular early warning system. This is how you get the app. You download Shake Alert LA, and this is what you see. These are screenshots. And when an earthquake happens, you get a warning like this, and this is a kind of light warning. There's another one that, if it's more severe, you have to duck underneath a table. And you can go to a map and see how big the earthquake is. So it's very important. It's kind of a must-have. I have it on my phone already.
How large a physical area would you be covered with that?
I think it's not sure, but it is. It will give you an alert for earthquakes are 5.0 or over. So
ones that would be felt in Los Angeles, supposedly. So, but it's a new system, and we'll see.
2 minutes warning.
It depends how far away the actual epicenter of the earthquake is. So if it's nearby, it's a shorter warning, but if it's farther away, the guest we had said that if there was a Salton Sea earthquake, you'd have a minute, which is a lot of time.
Enough time to stop public transportation, trains, surgeons can stop operations, things
Industrial
like that.
processes.
Is that a real earthquake over there on the picture, or hypothetical?
No, that was a test, hypothetical. There wasn't a 7.9 on December 28th. Luckily.
I was
That's
wondering
right.
if your phone needs to be on vibrate for it to work.
So now we're just going to show some pretty pictures to end our first half. You can dim our lights a little bit. It's just some beautiful galaxies seen by the Hubble Space Telescope in the Coma cluster. The one is losing some gas. Just a beautiful
That
image.
speaks for itself.
Yeah, just gorgeous. Beautiful picture of the moon. Composite picture.
Good one, sure.
Yes. An upside down rainbow. This is a crazy, super deep picture from the Hubble Space Telescope.
And it's complete. Don't even look at it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So in one of David Pinsky's beautiful, fully eclipsed moon pictures. And this is just an icy buffalo. Icy bison, really. An American bison.
And this one has a lot of science in it. Those are spectra.
Yeah, and this is our last picture, so we can bring the lights back up. We have about 8 minutes of break. We're going to show some videos during break, and then come on back, and we'll have a little bit more fun.
Yeah, this is your teaser, is it
Oh,
not?
right. We have a little bit of a teaser first.